Good evening, everyone. On behalf of the undergraduate writing program at Ashoka University, I welcome you very warmly to this evening's discussion. Before that, just a quick word about the UWP. The undergraduate writing program is one of the first writing and critical thinking programs of its kind in the country. Our program, developed bottom-up for the Indian context, is designed to cultivate rigorous writing practices in first-year students. Our flagship course, Introduction to Critical Thinking, is taught through small seminar-style classes, which employ the best writing pedagogy practices from across the world to nurture academic writing and critical thinking in the first year of undergraduate training. Track Changes is the UWP's very own speaker series, featuring hour-long events, facilitating discussions on a wide range of subjects between the students and the speakers. And these are intended to complement the critical thinking experience at Ashoka. For our past sessions, you can also look at the UWP playlist on the Ashoka YouTube page. I will quickly introduce our wonderful panelists for this evening's conversation. It's called Scholarly Writing and the Global South. We're very lucky to have with us today Vicky Williams. Vicky has over 20 years experience in scholarly publishing across a range of market-facing functions. She is the CEO of Emerald Group, following 4 years as CEO of Emerald Publishing. Rimina Mohapatra is an author. She's also an editor and the publishing manager of Routledge, Taylor and Francis Group. She has been involved in the making of over 1,000 books at Routledge and has an integral role in the origin and development of the Routledge India program in South Asia, founded in 2005. Oritra Paul is a book editor and digital marketer, currently working at Sri Shammo Books. She started as an academic editor, but has since branched into diverse and changing mediums of publishing, gaming, audio narratives, comics, and translation. She enjoys reading manga and webcomics and aspires to be a comic book writer. And sometimes with her friends, she conducts workshops on LGBTQIA awareness. Nathan Hollier is CEO and publisher with Melbourne University Publishing. He is a member of the Scholarly Journals Publishing Committee of the Australian Publishers Association and sits on the editorial board of the journal Learned Publishing. Nathan has also logged in at 11 p.m. Melbourne time, and we are so very grateful for that. The moderator for the conversation is our very own Arpita Das. Arpita teaches at the UWP. She's also a visiting faculty at the Creative Writing Department at Ashoka University. Arpita Das is the founder publisher of the independent publishing house Yoda Press. And she's also the series editor of the South Asia series at Melbourne University Press. Without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Arpita, and I'm so excited for our conversation this evening.
Thanks so much, Devapriya, for the warm introductions and to start it off so graciously. Hello, everybody. Hello, panelists. It's so good to see you, even under these absurd sort of conditions. I seem to see you only across the screen for the last 2 years. That's how I've seen Nathan and Oritra and Vicky. And Rimina, we are so thrilled to have you here as well. It's my first time on a panel with you, and I can't wait to get started. Everybody who's joining us this evening, I hope we can I hope to kickstart a conversation which will help a lot of our early career researchers, sort of feel a little more hopeful about academic publishing, because a lot of academic publishing at times looks a little grim these days. But the people we have here, the professionals we have here, are committed and, dare I say, incredibly humane academic publishing professionals who really know what it's like to be on both sides of the desk, as it were. And I think a lot of what could change and what could improve in the ecosystem really comes out of that, where you have a kind of an empathy for your author, and you understand, the challenges and the confusions they can often face, particularly as early career researchers. What we thought, actually, when we were having our email discussions earlier, Vicky was the one that who suggested that, talking about a corpus, developing a corpus for the Global South is such an important concern. And indeed, that is really where I want to begin. I want to start by talking about how there are still so many disciplines within academic writing and publishing where we feel often that the Global South is not represented the way it should be. And of course, other disciplines where, frankly, they ought to be more represented. And developing that corpus of writing on the Global South and by scholars in the Global South, which is equally important. We have to not lose sight of that, is so very important. I want to pose that question first to Rimina. Rimina, it very obviously comes to you first because you represent Routledge India. So many of the audience here, reads titles from the Routledge India, has read titles from the Routledge India list for years. And I think when we think in terms of academic publishing here in South Asia, Routledge India plays a very, very important role. And a little short of 2 decades ago, when Routledge opened its offices here, I remember scholars and publishers alike, we were all really excited because it felt like we were being taken seriously by academic publishing worldwide when that happened. Does the commitment to the South Asia corpus remain the same, Rimina, at your end? Is it something that you're working at in the same manner, with the same excitement with which Routledge had come in, say, a little short of 20 years ago?
Thank you very much, Arpita, for having me. I think that is a very, very important question, and it is one that needs to be certainly answered first. I think Global South is increasingly becoming such an important part of our academic discourse and conversations. And as you said, I mean, a few years ago, when we arrived, I think, there was that sort of a need for bringing a lot of what were not considered as either academic enough or at least in the, there were those sort of gate kept in some sense, those subjects, those areas. And I think South Asian scholars felt that struggle quite a bit. And with a lot of publishers coming in, including Routledge, Routledge is one of them. I think slowly that narrative is sort of now changing. And I think, with the proliferation of multidisciplinary areas within the larger main areas, earlier you would have, I always find this so interesting that we used to initially have like these catalogs where you have politics, international relations, history, sociology. And now increasingly you have to kind of customize them. You have to talk to Dalit studies. You have to talk about Northeast India studies. These are very, very strong areas where we have research coming in, where we feel that the voices need to come into the mainstream. It should no longer remain as what we used to call subaltern studies, or they should be part of the core politics. They should be part of the core sociology or sexuality studies. So I think that is definitely one of the big thrusts for Routledge, and it continues even today. I think that certainly is.
Rimina, I sometimes wonder, when one goes to the website now, it sort of takes you to a Routledge.com, even if it's Routledge India. I think that change occurred a few years ago. Does that in any way dilute?
Well, I'll have to, thanks for asking that. There is a little trick there. The idea is that although everything has the Routledge.com appearance, there is the regional tab on top. there is a little small country flag there. So, I mean, usually it would put you on a landing page. If earlier it used to be a default, if someone from India would click, they would actually land onto the India page. India meaning the page is particularly the same because these are essentially simultaneous editions available in INR, in dollars, and GBP to be specific. So now you just need to sort of tap that region and make it India, and then it kind of shows. So that's just I mean, the work on website, that keeps continuing for these. But I do realize, and there is that concerted effort on making available most of our titles available in South Asia at a South Asian price. I mean, there is that that effort, definitely concerted effort. So we really are working towards that.
And of course, all scholars from the Global South also want to be read everywhere else.
Absolutely.
So how are you bridging that gap?
So that's yeah, absolutely. So like I said, that's the global aspect of the books that we commission. Essentially, every book that we are actually doing or commissioning at Routledge India, they are actually available as global editions across the world. So in fact, we are in a situation where we actually produce them there first, and then we bring out special South Asia edition for this regional market to cater to a large readership. So so you kind of play between being offering a kind of a global service, a global reach, a wider readership to possibly an area or a subject which would otherwise may or not be taken up if it was solely global. So for example, a book on just to give this one example, since it's a book on Dalit studies, for example, if we produce it here with the title, let's say Dalit Capital, for example, it will appear as a global book in UK, in USA, in other parts, in South America, in other regions as the same book with the same. So that content is really, it is making that journey into other continents with a lot of local flavor thrown in, but it is a global book. So I think my idea is, I always think about it this way, that it is kind of a reverse, or a, globalization has its, the other side of things, how when you're writing a book on Swaraj, for example, if it's coming out from a London edition first, in a way, it's a victory for every nation in some sense, that you can talk about nationalism outside of another nation and yet do that book coming out from there, and it is available globally everywhere. So
and does that mean the pricing still remains a battle when you bring it into South Asia, or have you been able to sort that?
So the pricing, again, because it's such a, we do what, if we do around 7,000 to 8,000 books a year, just Routledge alone, then obviously every book, and they're diverse subject areas and different lists. So based on what seems relevant for the South Asia markets, I think the editorial sales people make a concerted effort to actually bring them out at a special price for the South Asia readership. So right. that is definitely one. And as as academic publishers, essentially we are unable to bring out a trade paperback. It's very rare that we actually have a book which will also come out and, so I think that balance is played out very carefully, depending on what looks suitable for this region, where the feedback is coming from, and accordingly, you price it to the market, and then have there's a little bit of a gap sometimes. The book may come out in November, a global edition, and it may come out, let's say, 2 months after into the South Asia market, but we do try and get as many as possible.
Wow, Rimina, that volley of questions from me, I was, I had to do that, right? Because so many people wrote in, we really want to hear what Routledge India has to say. They're my publisher, And I was like, okay, volley of questions goes to Rimina. You did so well. Thank you for being so on.
Thank you for asking.
So forthcoming. Nathan, of course, this has always been your, something that has always interested you, isn't it? Thinking about South Asia particularly, but I suppose being positioned in Australia means that thinking about the global South also comes organically, because Australia always falls somewhere on the boundary, isn't it? And I was thinking, I'd love to hear your thoughts about this and how you have brought that sensibility into Melbourne University Press. But I'd also like you to, of course, talk about the South Asia imprint that you have recently started. Of course, I have my vested interest for you to talk about that, but please do tell us.
Thanks, Arpita, and thanks for including me in this discussion. Yes, it certainly is a long-standing passion of mine to learn about and encourage discussion with other parts of the world. A book that made a very profound impact on me, now published 15 years ago, was Southern Theory by Raewyn Connell, who's an Australian sociologist. And in that book, really the key thing that she argued was that we need to value scholarship and knowledge most, which has the greatest impact on specific communities and peoples and places and times, rather than valuing knowledge in terms of its supposed universal applicability. Yeah. And what she was arguing was that the knowledges that do tend to be valued most by the global metropole, as she put it, in Europe and North America, were those which were supposedly universal, and what ended up being excluded within that supposedly universal phenomenon was the experiences of people from the global south. Those experiences were effectively erased within that theorizing. So it's a philosophical point, but also a social point. And for us as scholarly publishers, I see our role as finding knowledge, finding research which is valuable, and then pushing that knowledge and research to as big a readership as we can. And for us at Melbourne Uni Press, we do publish into the retail sector. All of our titles go into the retail sector, more or less all of them, in addition to being available in libraries. So in terms of getting stories from the global south, other parts of the world, that I see that as an extension of that larger role of a scholarly publisher, which is to find things that people might not know that they're interested in, but they should be interested in, they should be learning about. In Australia, there's about 600,000 Indian-born people, which, if you add that to Indian heritage people, that's about 5% of the population here. My sense is that publishing in Australia and mass media in Australia is not really taking account of that proportion of the population. So that was part of my interest. But as I say, I have a wider interest in learning about people in different parts of the world, and particularly in the global south. And I think a lot of people do, but the sort of mechanisms are not there as yet, or for people to learn about these places as they would like. And Arpita, when we put out a media release about the South Asia series that we were going to do, I was pleasantly surprised to have immediate responses from the literary editor of the Australian newspaper saying, fantastic, great, let's support that.
Wow.
Also from the literary editor of the Age and Sydney Morning Herald newspapers, which are the biggest newspapers in Melbourne and Sydney, saying, oh, very good idea, and interesting, let's I look forward to seeing those titles come out. So I was very pleased to partner with Arpita and Yoda, because, I mean, for a number of reasons, but we've managed to find a way, we think, to make it work in a practical sense, because Yoda will do the editions in South Asia jointly with us, and we'll do the edition in Australia and other parts of the world. And another aspect, I'll stop talking in a moment, but what I really, the spirit of this South Asia series also, it is telling what life is like for people on the ground in India and other parts of South Asia, and particularly from for groups who are marginalised or whose voices don't get heard. And I know the kinds of issues that Arpita is passionately interested in, and it's a way for us to get away from the men in suits talking about geopolitics and Indo-Pacific and Sino, what they're going to do, China, and all of these sort of would-be power people talking about Australia, India, the Quad, and so forth, which misses all of these human interaction and human understanding, which is actually extremely important and interesting, and what we should actually be trying to do, I think, as citizens in the world.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Nathan. That's fantastic. And yeah, I mean, just the possibilities of an imprint that comes out of that, kind of emerges out of Australia and looks at the global South and South Asia. I really think the sky is the limit. You're absolutely right about that. And it kind of overturns a lot of the regular Australia, India, Australia, South Asia kind of stuff that seems the kind of thing that, as you said, men in suits love to talk about. Excellent. Vicky, I'm next coming to you. With the same question, but I mean, it always interests me when I read that tagline of Emerald Publishing, which says digital first, academic publishing. And of course, I want you to talk about that when I pose the formats question to you. But in a lot of ways, actually, that feeds into you having a global audience immediately, and a global readership and a global author pool immediately, isn't it? And the second thing, of course, I'm amazed at the kind of a wide array of offices that you have. And certainly the thought has gone into making sure that you have on the ground collaborations across the global South. You're really walking the talk. You're not just saying it as some sort of tokenism. So do talk to us about that, because I'd love to see how it actually plays out for you and how you manage to put all the pieces in place.
Yeah, I mean, we were one of the first. I mean, we are predominantly a journals publisher. We do have a books program as well, a thriving books program, but we publish about 350 journals, and we were one of the first publishers to actually switch to a digital environment in the mid-90s, and that was obviously with the intent to reach a much broader audience in terms of access, but also for that to generate authorship as well. So you kind of build your brand digitally, that hopefully has a kind of circular effect in terms of raising that profile, attracting authorship, and repeat authorship. But in parallel to our digital journey, we did, as you say, really invest heavily in local offices. And I think our customer profile is relatively unique in that it's not Western dominated. It is completely global. So our customer base is completely global, as is our authorship base. And I think a big part of that has been that close connection to local communities. And as a result of that, we've developed a lot of local publishing initiatives as well. So even though we are a global publisher, we have a number of titles that are very specific to the local area or local context, but that is delivered through a global platform, a global digital platform in terms of reach and readership. So we've always been very passionate about making sure that global voices are heard and that we reduce some of those real or perceived barriers to the publication process. Because I think we have to be honest in this conversation that scholarly publishing, the processes, the measurements, the metrics that support it were very much designed with the so-called elite West in mind. Yeah. And I think for years this has presented something of a closed shop. And it has meant that we haven't been hearing those global voices as much as we should in the scholarly literature. We've got these elite institutions, the academics sat within those institutions really dominating the published corpus. And this has become something of a self-fulfilling prophecy. So we've suffered from a real lack of diversity in editorship, in editorial boards, in reviewer pools, and therefore in authorship as well. So, a real problem that not everyone has wanted to tackle. I think if we're being honest, I think this is changing, but arguably not fast enough. And to develop diversity in the corpus, we really do need to think differently and develop more positive and more inclusionary practices, whether that is looking at that composition of editors and editorial boards, whether it's increasing diversity in reviewer pools, offering diversity training to editors, which we've started to do. I think we also need to look at content differently. So, less in a linear way and much more in a horizontal way. So we've started to look at much more mission-based, goal-based areas of publishing, so that you get interdisciplinary research, but you also get very different voices and actors coming into play in actually developing a response to those challenges. So I do think there needs to be this constant mix of global and local. Yeah. But some of these solutions do need to be more locally led than perhaps they have been traditionally certainly within journals publishing.
Sure. Vicky, when you moved from Emerald Publishing to the Emerald Group, became CEO of Emerald Group, I know one of the big things on your, in your sort of part of your vision was diversity and inclusion. And of course, that means a lot to us, positioned as we are in the Global South. Tell us something about your work with this this particular issue.
So this initially started as quite an internally focused initiative for us in terms of actually thinking about the demographic of our staff, our employees, because I think that also says something about then how you connect with your kind of global and local communities.
Of course, absolutely.
So it started as quite an internal initiative, but now it's reached a point where it is very external in terms of the kind of promises we are making in terms of the ways that we want to change. So this will include things like, as I said, specific targets around increasing diversity in those gatekeeper roles in the publishing process. So as I said, editors, editorial board reviewers, you need diversity in those roles to actually reduce some of these real or perceived barriers that occur within the process. the more that you have diversity in those kind of more gatekeeper roles, the more you can actually engage a much broader and wider pool of authorship. So it's coming into play in those areas, but we've signed up, for example, to the Sustainable Development Goals Publisher Compact, which asks publishers to really think about how they are working towards achieving the SDGs, and that makes us accountable. You know, it makes us accountable to actually developing practices, enhancing processes, making sure that we are ready and willing to report on areas of change, or be transparent where things haven't changed and what we intend to do about that. So yeah, it's becoming a very visible external commitment for us, and we are actively commissioning such a broad, really exciting broad pool of authors to our books list and our journals list.
Wow, that sounds fantastic. Vicky, thank you for telling us about that. I want to move to you next, Oritra, and of course, you know, we have this sort of kindred thing between us, both being small independent publishing professionals. And Oritra, I mean, you know, I know from the Yoda Press experience, I know that Sri Samya, and I know your list, Sri Samya has always been publishing the most fabulous work on South Asia, focused on gender and caste, and then facing the same problems that say we face at Yoda Press, which is how does our work then go out? So we have perhaps, you know, lists like yours, perhaps has the most sort of solid kind of, you know, scholarly work on with the local nuance, you know, in place. And then we face those problems of gatekeeping in a different way, right? I mean, for the longest time, we used to get those responses when we used to try and sell rights to academic publishers abroad. Oh, this is too Indian. Oh, this is too South Asian. I'm sure you've got many of those. So our problem is a little different. Your problem is, you're doing the work already, but then how do you get it out there? How do you get it a wider readership? So what have you managed to figure out? What solutions have you managed to find in this regard?
I don't think so. We have found a solution as of yet. But like we have found a sort of compromise and partnership. I think as you know, Yoda and us and like many other indie have like collaborated with Sage Publication, and Sage is like the gateway for us to the world, because like Sage comes with the promise of libraries. And like recently I've read that like the library culture is like very, like, how do I say, it's not important, it's like part and parcel of like the Western readership, where like a lot of communities like totally depend on libraries. You don't see that much of it in India. So like we have like certain books which are very India specific, but if like we collaborated with Sage or some bigger publication house who have like a global presence, it is very much easier for us to like access like readership who are interested in niche readership. I mean, in niche topics. Like I don't expect like 100 readers to come for like a Dalit book like from US, but at least there'll maybe 10 readers in like in London sitting there like waiting for some new Dalit scholarship coming up. But obviously, because they're not in India, they cannot access that book. So if they're getting it in any format, like ebook or like the web, what is the web in format, like where you can log in and you can just like get the book. So I personally think like collaboration for like small publication and bigger publication houses is the only way for like niches to survive.
Absolutely, yeah. Oritra, has your when you are commissioning or you are working on a book, for instance, now with that in mind, that it's going on out to a bigger audience than we managed on our own earlier. Has your editorial focus changed? I mean, I want us to talk about the vocabulary of the writing later, but has your sort of focus as an editor changed when you're making the book, keeping the audience in mind? Because we do keep audiences in mind.
Yes, definitely. Because me as a reader, I am somebody who's like very much like in sync with fiction. Like I always like prefer fiction to learn anything. I would not go for an academic book by choice. And I know my friends and like the readership I interact with, they kind of prefer like something which is lighter, which is something easily accessible. And those readership, they get their information sort of sometimes from like I mean, our first primary interaction with nonfiction or academic writing comes from newspapers. And now newspaper has shifted and given it way to the online presence. So I'll just keep a lookout for what like the readership are looking, especially I lurk in Twitter and Instagram to see what they're doing, what they want to read. And so like I am trying, and like a few of our former editors of Stree who have gone into like academics, they send us suggestions on like what the readers are looking out for. Like a lot of young students, they don't want to read books. They just don't want to read books. They want to hear their scholars. I mean, they want to interact with the scholars. So like for them, Twitter is the best place where they go and like kind of bombard the scholars out there. But again,
that's something, Aritra, since you're bigger, I mean, since social media is something that is of interest to you, I've noticed academic Twitter has become quite a big thing, hasn't it?
Yes, and I think like it has to like, and you have to like praise or kind of blame Netflix also because of the chair, which kind of like
yes, of course.
A lot of people
get that show.
Yes, yes. A lot of people kind of like realize, oh, there is like an academic Twitter itself. So like we also like some of our authors were like, should we also like go into Twitter, because they were afraid of getting a Twitter account because they were afraid of the mean tweets and the bullying and the trolling, of course. So it is interesting how like readership is now like bite size. But they also want facts, and it is very hard to check facts on Twitter. So that is where like that's why I insist that like you have to read the book. So if they're not like, I mean, I would like prefer like how do I say medium trans like how do I say, I mean, I'm forgetting the words. Wow. Like something that like
all the time.
Something like that just like transcends like the boundaries of a book. So like my aim, like when I'm still not commissioning as of yet, I just search for authors who can do it. So I'm looking for things which like intersect, like something which can be like produced in a book format, can be spoken about, can be like transferred into a podcast, can be made into audiobooks, because there are many readers who cannot like read books because they are dyslexic and they have like other reading writing problems, but they like to listen to books. Because I was like looking into Audible, and Audible has like amazing collection of podcasts and audio narratives, which actually I've never found in book format. So I think academic, as in the term academic itself, needs like evolve, and like they should say like you can do research which is not necessarily part of like a printed format. It can be anything at this point, as long as it's cited and sourced and like properly researched.
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely, Aritra. And I knew I just had to get you started about formats. And you know, it's so refreshing to have someone on the panel, an academic studies writing panel, publishing panel, also talking about these things, because of course these things have become so important and valid in the space, and also smash the gatekeeping that Vicky was talking about earlier. Nathan, my next question is for you though. I noticed on the MUP website, you also have true crime. And I mean, I think there is a leaning now towards narrative nonfiction, even for academic publishers. I think they are looking at narrative nonfiction more and more seriously, aren't they?
Well, I must admit we don't do a lot of it because the true crime really that list preceded my arrival there 2.5 years ago. I mean, it was an interesting time in that my predecessor had taken the press into a much more trade publishing model, with the idea that with that would then underpin financially the academic or the sort of straight scholarly publishing. That hasn't been my approach. So yeah, true crime would be a small element of what we would do now.
But I know from the brief you gave me for the South Asia imprint that narrative nonfiction, nuanced research, narrative nonfiction is something that you do consider the go-to sort of format for what you'd like to publish.
Oh, absolutely, yes, because as I say, we're very interested in reaching readers outside of the academy, and that's where I see, I mean, it's the traditional goal of a university press as put by the Daniel Coit Gilman in 1870 or whatever it was at Johns Hopkins University Press, which was that the goal is to share knowledge to those who can't attend the daily lectures. And so to me, that, you know, the challenge of this form of publishing is to make that research, the knowledge accessible, and we add value through the editing process, the design, marketing, of course, publicity, and all of that goes into trying to reach that bigger audience. And I do often say to scholars as well that you can't, in a book form, or at least in our books where we're publishing for a readership that's not just within the academy, you can't seek to win a technical argument with your fellow scholars in the book form. You're better off doing that in journals, having those arguments where you were just talking with other scholars, but in the book, you know, your job is to disseminate the knowledge and put it in a way that can be more easily taken on
by a wider readership. Yeah, Rimina, I want to come to you with a similar question. I mean, this is something that, you know, we do want a lot of our scholarly authors to understand, isn't it? The fact that there has to be a journey between dissertation style writing and an academic manuscript. Rimina, are you there? Yeah.
Yeah. Could you repeat that question, please?
Yeah, I'm saying that, you know, this journey between an academic dissertation style writing and what can be published in a manuscript form. I think that you know, it's not a distinction between scholarly writing, narrative nonfiction. It's actually now more and more, with the kind of multidisciplinary and global audience that we have, we are actually trying to find almost a good sort of coexistence of the two, isn't it? In a well-written manuscript.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think I'm glad you asked this question, because this is something which was on my mind that I hope to cover, or at least one of the panelists could cover, the fact that, you know, I do sense there is this gap between, given how big, I mean, India is, as you know, third in English language publishing, and there are innumerable regional language publishers. So there is a lot of publishing happening, and yet there is that gap between scholars who are actually trying to write, you know, and the books that are getting published. I mean, that journey is not an easy one, I think. And people like yourselves, I mean, I know, and I respect this so much, the fact that, you know, there are these, you do see this need, and you actually come up with workshops or any formal and informal ways of actually bridging that gap to figure out what is it that is required for actually, you know, a piece of writing to actually turn into either a journal article or a you know, a book, or a chapter in an edited volume, or an article in a handbook. I mean, the idea is that a lot of, in fact, I mean, you know this very well. I mean, for academic publishers, one of the biggest problems is the rejection rate. I mean, there's so much good material, there's so many great ideas, but often because of certain stringent reasons, which are sometimes unknown to the scholar, or they're not probably exposed to those ideas in their training, you know, often times journal articles do get rejected. I mean, there is, I think, something like 17% acceptance rate for a number of journals, and books equally, but maybe not as much.
Not as much.
Because these are bigger, and these are, they take time, and most publishers spend a lot of time developing these actually through a peer review and things like that. So I think the journey from actually writing something and to make it publish worthy, that is something there. I think there needs to be that kind of support on both ends, both on the education front, where possibly this is something, scholars are expected to kind of know this. They do their schooling, then they come to their undergraduate, then there's post-graduation. But when are they actually learning how to write in order to publish? And increasingly, you will see how much pressure there is on scholars to publish. I mean, a lot of it is actually based on their promotion, their tenure, their careers, their, any great thing that they do need to do is based on the kind of publishing they do. And it's a tricky area, because we do need to kind of provide that support, perhaps both as publishers and both at the end of universities, such as Ashoka and other universities who are feeling this need. I mean, there are the concepts of research method, but where is the publishing method? Has it percolated enough? And that's something. And the other thing I was thinking is that, there is this whole network of people that we are actually dealing with. I mean, at the one end, you have the author, a scholar who's turning into an author and writing a chapter or writing a book or writing an article. And on the other hand, you have the ecosystem of the librarians, the societies, there could be professionals who are writing. They may not be teachers, they may be instructors, they may be practitioners of a field. And, so there's faculty, librarians, there's distributors, there's a whole network for which a book speaks. So a book is not in silo, right? I mean, when books are being written, and especially academic books, they need to really fit into a lot of these requirements, the asks. And within publishing houses, as you know, I mean, there's always that thing about editorial, marketing, sales. I mean, there's a lot of feedback, and it's a dynamic world where content is no more just content. I mean, there's a great deal of ferment, and I think it certainly, I mean, there's a great deal of work that needs to be done both on the at the end of the scholar who's actually working through a dissertation, and to convert it through the editor's help, through other kinds of peer help, through looking at other templates, examples of academic books, and to kind of imbibe all those elements into. And I mean, I do find that, I mean, we do see that the evidence of this is pretty apparent, that you see books sometimes which are, I mean, in the sense of manuscripts that come in, and there are a lot of things that need to be addressed before it actually becomes a book.
Yeah. Rimina, you mentioned peer review, and I want to actually move to Vicky to talk about journals as well. But quick question. Peer review, as far as academic books are concerned, one of the things, for instance, we have started at Yoda Press to try and reduce the gatekeeping a little is we've started asking our authors who they would prefer us to send books or manuscripts out to for reviews. So that it's a much more supported and honest kind of a conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
That the power dynamics don't come into play. Of course, that is after we've done our due diligence.
Sure. Yeah.
Are you doing something similar?
Yes. We have a similar, yes. Because, I mean, especially with open access and various other forms, you do see that there is a tendency to actually make the work as receptive, as transparent as, so the conventional notion of double blind, it doesn't really, I mean, in today's day and age, and in any case, it's more transparent, as you say. The idea essentially is to get feedback from other scholars in the field, and it doesn't matter who they are. We know that we trust whoever is the author will do that kind of thing only to make the work better. So there is that certain sort of pursuit of excellence. Yeah. But however, knowing that this is a community of academic writers who kind of support each other in terms of, making your work better.
Very well said. Absolutely. I think it's the feeling of community that has been missing for so very long. Vicky, nowhere else is it missing more than in the journal space. And Emerald Publishing, I think you all have been really trying to make a difference. and, in kind of smashing that gate and trying to make it as open as possible. Talk us through this. How have you, I think that's something that you also have called the Open Research Platform, which I find really interesting. Yeah. But talk about the whole thing. How are you trying to change this?
Yeah, so, I mean, we've talked a lot, obviously, on this call about gatekeeping, and transparency clearly hasn't always been what it should be, particularly in a non-digital environment. And if the processes aren't transparent, and if your demographic of your editorial team isn't diverse, you kind of end up with a very particular view of what constitutes quality. And if that group is in control of desk acceptance or rejection and the peer review process, you can end up with exclusionary practices, as we've said, and your citations might not be diverse. Really, if you're only focusing on these so-called top journals, the ones with the largest impact factor. So things are changing. I think the review process is now increasingly transparent because most publishers use standard systems where an author can track their submission throughout the process. And good publishers will work with editors and reviewers to make sure reviews are constructive, positive, and even if there's a rejection at the end of that process, that whole process has been as supportive as possible. In the open world, and you referenced our Emerald Open Research Platform, Arpita, the review process can actually be completely open, and that's the case with our open platform. So in that case, a researcher would submit their article directly to the platform. It would go through a kind of cursory desk review, and then would be published very quickly within 2 to 3 weeks, and would be then openly reviewed by a select pool of reviewers. Some researchers don't like that because it can feel very exposing, but I think actually open review can promote better, more polite, more supportive practice, actually. So that's something we are experimenting with. But we have what we call an open to all philosophy when it comes to open research, which I think is needed in this world where business models at the moment that are dominating in the open world are in themselves being exclusionary because they are very high cost, which doesn't support global participation, and it doesn't support participation for certain subject disciplines as well, which are maybe not as well funded. So we publish in the social sciences, obviously not as well funded as STEM subjects.
Sure.
Just stands to reason, really. So we have options from, if you're an author with us and your article is accepted, you can place your author accepted manuscript into your institutional repository immediately. There's zero embargo on that. And that creates an open asset. You can pay for hybrid, kind of a gold option. You can look at our open research platform, which importantly supports different types of research communication. So not just the article, it might be data, it might be opinion pieces, it might be policy briefs, which then hopefully helps with wider participation and engagement as well, as we've been talking about. So there are multiple ways, I think, that publishers can support a more open journey that don't have to result in an article processing charge.
Right. I think that would really be of importance, significance to a lot of early career researchers who are beginning to publish, and I'm hoping there'll be some questions from there. But before I open up to questions, Oritra, I really, when you think about it, what does academic publishing look like in the era of metaverse? I mean, and I don't want to dismiss anything, because, for instance, this wonderful academic writer, actually one of Rimina's authors, who's a friend of mine, and he was just telling me he works in Ireland on Kerala, on history in Kerala, and he was talking about this fabulous blog that a few of them run, all of them working in Kerala, and how ever since they started sort of networking through this community of bloggers, and writing together, as it were, and putting their work out together, he feels there is more of a kind of, everybody kind of has ideas for each other about how to publish publishers, how to approach publishers, how to approach journals, and there's real sense of community there. And sales for all these scholars' books have gone up as well, interestingly, ever since they've got this blog going. So what do you think? I mean, you're the one with interest in the formats, the new format.
Actually, today I was in one of my groups, like Facebook groups, where like we talk about writing. So I came across actually a very interesting quote, and it says, "The best writing is created in a community with a strong sense of audience." And I was like, this resonates. So in the metaverse of future academics that I'm hoping, is that what happens is like we keep talking like when somebody is asked in the question, what is the difference between scholarly and academic? That's like a long debate. We'll go into that later. But when we are like aiming for academic, we generally have an idea that is an institution. Academia is in correlation with an institution, and as for scholarly, it can be both and personal interest, and it can be both professional interest. So what happens is there are like a lot as you mentioned, your blogger friends, what happens is there are a lot of people who are interested in small topic but are actually not trained in any way. Like they are not trained, they just love this topic, so they have been researching on their own and they put up their own ideas. So what happens is when this 4 or 5 people come together, they make a community, and that's when exchange of ideas happen. And with exchange of ideas, there's somebody who can Sunani Banerjee of Seagull Books. She had said sometimes an author doesn't know that he's sitting on a book. When you interact with them, you realize, oh, there's a book, we can form a book. So so when multiple people who have interest in similar topics or topics that intersect, they come and communicate, they can create a wonderful manuscript or a wonderful piece of research work. I mean, all those Panama papers would not have happened if the 33 journalists if they did not come together. So I personally feel like the next generation, and the one who are younger than me, who are in academia and who want to pursue the hard life, they should start looking around. It's just no longer in the books and what you're learning in classes. You really have to go and find what people are interested in, interact with people from the topic, whatever is your interested topic. You cannot just say oh, I have read this because it had been cited and it's actual. So sometimes you have to go and sometimes you have to go and verify your sources. You can a blog will not take the responsibility of making sure that something is correct or if it is verified, but you have to do your own research work. So I personally feel more of and our universities need to do better. I mean, I'm sorry, but I come I studied I studied in a regional college. From there I went to a bigger university. From there I went to a very prestigious university. So I have seen every when you go to some a place like Ashoka, you get you have teachers who are who see your potential and they push you. But sometimes what happens is when you are in a smaller college where resources there's no funding. So the primary aim of your teachers is just to make you pass, make you have a decent result so you can just get a job. Many of my classmates have gone into teaching because because they were always told that is a steady job. And some of them wanted to become scholars, but they did not have the training. So they could not crack the PhD entrance examination. And it was really hard for them to and they were where did we lack? It is just not about lacking. It is more about you did not get that push that some of the better universities, better is the wrong word. Some of the universities who have more access and more funding can provide. So, so I think our universities primary, they need to teach kids because when I was in graduation, I did not know how to do a critical thinking. I did not know how to I did not even understand what they meant by critical thinking and do this criticism. I just went and wrote a summary of a poem. That is not how it is supposed to be. So
absolutely.
I think there's like a surge in young, I won't like the Gen Z. They are like more into like trying to take back the academic like how they say the gatekeeping thing.
Sure.
They are like they are doing their own research. They're like writing their own things, and they're taking that amateur reading into like a more, how to say, in an amplified way. And it's really interesting to see how they approach texts and things. Because like three concentrates on Dalit writing, and some of like we have scholars who come who like totally research into the thing, but they also like go back to those young readership who like give them suggestion like, this is what I want to read in my book, this is what I want to read in your writing. So
Right.
so like the young readership are like much more broad, not broad, like they're like
I think
open.
there's much more of a communication between young authors and the readership. I think younger, I also see that with Yoda Press, the author pool. I think the younger authors are much more cognizant and interested in wanting to find out what the readership wants, what the younger readership wants. Absolutely. There's one more thing, as Arita was speaking, that I was reminded of. I want to ask both Vicky and Nathan this question. Well, we talked about peer reviews, but what she spoke about, Aritra, this pressure of citations. How is it with, where you're positioned? Do you see the same thing as we see in India when it comes to pressure of citation, getting cited? Because I see it all around me among my young authors, my young scholarly authors, academic authors and colleagues, and I think it can be debilitating, that pressure. Nathan, Vicky, first Vicky, yeah.
Absolutely, it is completely debilitating, and I think I don't know if it was Rimina who was talking earlier about the incentive structure within universities. And I think as publishers, we can drive as much change as we can possibly drive, but actually some of that change needs to come from within university establishments as well. So at the moment, that system supports, for me, sameness. Researchers are encouraged to publish in these top journals. Those journals dominate impact factor leagues. If you don't publish in those journals, it affects your career, it affects your funding. But these are the journals that are probably not the ones that are reaching wider audiences and having that broader societal impact that's so important and should be so important, I think, for anyone doing research. Reaching the audience, having an impact on policy, on society, on the economy, it should be more important than which of your peers are citing you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Philosophically, morally, it should be more important. So that academic incentive structure really needs to change if we are to drive those broader impacts, and if publishing is then able to respond in the right way.
Absolutely. Nathan?
Well, it's a bigger problem for scholars with journals and in STEM disciplines than in humanities and social sciences. But I echo the points that Vicky made, and there is overall, one could say, a tyranny of metrical measures that are applied in ways that do work against diversity of voices and publications and
Absolutely. I think that's so true. And it's something that has to be taken on board, I think, before all the other things that we were talking about really go into. Of course, it all has to happen simultaneously, but here's a big sort of obstacle that has to be.
Well, it is, and I think that the knowledge of this as an issue and of the politics of it at the really top level of management within universities is not good. And I've spoken with some of those, senior managers, they've said, oh, well, you know, we want our authors to be publishing with these publishers and those publishers, which, you know, you could predict who that they're going to talk about. And I would say, well, but those publishers all happen to be based in, you know, the global north, and, you know, isn't this just a kind of self-fulfilling, you know, prophecy? I think Vicky might have used that term, but, you know, it's perpetuating this structure. And you know, this is like a proposition that has never been put to them. It's sort of, so yeah, I think that there is some educating to happen there, and discussion to be continued. And I'm not sure that we're winning at the moment. I know that there is renewed pushes down here to have greater quantitative bias, you could say, in measuring impact.
Right. With that sobering note, I'm going to look at questions. Devapriya, Mukundan, do we have some questions from the audience?
Yes, lots of questions. Arpita, do you want to just sort of go with the Q&A first, and then we've got a couple of questions in the chat box as well.
Right. Should I just start right from the top?
Yes, sure.
Yeah, okay. So there's a question which goes like this. I'm a legal academic researcher, and I've heard recently that there is currently a higher likelihood of publishing in a research handbook than monographs in the industry. Is that something we should keep in mind when framing our method and writing? Rimina, is this something you want to pick up or you want to answer? Whether a monograph is less likely than a research handbook, or I suppose an edited volume for a legal academic researcher?
Well, I mean, not necessarily, but it could be true as well. I mean, it really depends on the kind of, because a chapter is short and it often fits with a larger, you know, sort of a strong thematic volume that may be happening with a lot of contributors already reviewed and everything. So possibly there is that chance of having that in. But I wouldn't say that's entirely so, because it really depends on the kind of monograph it is. And often publishers are looking to have original writing you know, so there are both angles to it. So I'm not sure it's one or the other, but maybe in practical terms, perhaps in one instance, it might be a little easier just because there is already a volume in place, and, you know, it's the chance of getting that is probably a little higher, but I wouldn't really count on that. Yeah.
So you mean, I mean, academic publishers are still happy to publish monographs? I mean,
absolutely, absolutely,
right?
Because, you know, to have authored monographs, I mean, because there is really a really large number of edited volumes with contributions, chapter contributions that come to any publisher. So that's always a bigger number in some sense, handbooks and, you know, things like that. But monographs, definitely. I mean, definitely Routledge India, certainly. And I know of Routledge as well, very, very strong on monographs as well. So it really depends on the kind of list you're looking at, the kind of publisher you're approaching, and whether if it's law, then, you know, maybe it's also subject specific sometimes. So it really depends.
Right. Nathan, do you have the same response to this? Do you get a lot of edited volumes, but you remain interested in monographs?
Well, we do more monograph than the sort of edited volumes, but I think Rimina put the answer very very eloquently there, that it is a kind of a context specific situation.
Right.
You need to be aware, you need to be sort of thinking about that.
Right, absolutely. I think that answers it rather well. Okay, we have another one from another anonymous attendee. working in India, is there a conscious and active effort or internal policy within the presses to publish Dalit authors writing on Dalit issues, to correct the tremendous overrepresentation of upper caste Savarnas in India and abroad being published on caste topics currently? So, I mean, I'm not supposed to talk too much here, but I can say for sure, Yoda Press, yes, absolutely. We are very, very committed to publishing on Dalit issues. And specifically try and go as much as possible to Dalit authors for that. But this is really Oritra's stronghold. Sri Samya has been known for publishing on Dalit studies for the longest time, and they've published some of the best works from India in that space. So Oritra, how would you, answer?
And of course there is it is our as a sorry, I'm Savarna, so as in editor, it is my duty to go and find out authors who are from the marginal communities and publish them. But yes, there's an internal policy, and we should make it clear, sometimes we have to reject manuscripts, not because we are because we are from the privileged space. It's more to do with topics and subjects not aligning with our publication interests. So sometimes we have to let go of topics and books which sometimes are backdated, sometimes they are not well researched, or sometimes they just sometimes they just lack in something which doesn't make it into the final round. And for Dalit writing especially, we have a strong peer review, and as well as reviewers, separate communities where we send our books, and we kind of send them to 5 reviewers, and after that we make sure that everything is correct, and because that is an important factor of the literature. We cannot just publish anything and then which might do more harm than actually helping the community. So yes, of course. And I think now sounds wrong, but yeah, but now also there is an interest in the Dalit community from more readership, because it is becoming trendy in a lot of academic spaces, and then it is also becoming a viable business format. So so now you can see a lot of interest coming from different people who had previously maybe rejected manuscripts, because there are certain manuscripts
very polite here. Yeah.
Because certain manuscripts came to us because they were rejected few years back, but now some of the publishers are trying to get those authors back, because now they have made an impact. So yeah, of course there is
they've got a very strong readership. You can say it, Oritra, some of the bigger publishers have now suddenly got interested in this space. Okay, so I think that answers the question nicely. There's an interesting question, sort of a comment question here, which I want to move to, again by an anonymous attendee. It says, I'm definitely speaking for a place of no experience in publishing. In fact, my undergraduate degree did not place any importance on writing anything with the aim of getting it published. But I wanted to ask whether it's not the issue of building an awareness of this publishing culture and place in India first. A professor, for example, told me he disliked participating in panels and seminars or even getting published because there is not enough engagement on that front in terms of other academics engaging with your work. Well, I can certainly say, I mean, I get the point you're trying to make. And I think, a program like an undergraduate writing program and the Introduction to Critical Thinking course that we have within it is trying to deal with precisely this sort of a conundrum, this lack of this publishing sort of awareness of publishing culture as well. And I know that other universities like Kriya and Jindal, etc., are also trying to do something. Of course, it has to happen in a much, much larger scale. A lot of us are also running workshops outside of the university space. But I want to also ask Vicky if she wants to talk about this. Vicky, is this something that you think about, this movie? I mean, when you're working with different locations on the globe and talking to communities of writers and communities of authors, and then talking about this feeling that it has to start well before they are seasoned senior researchers. It has to start at the undergraduate level, really.
Absolutely. I mean, in many parts of the world, we have a position that is called Publishing Relationship Manager. So they act as the kind of publishing contact locally for our global program. And I know that they will often go into universities and hold workshops at undergrad level on the how to get published process, you know, including issues like plagiarism, predatory publishing, open access publishing, just trying to demystify some of the kind of processes that happen, which must be really opaque to people when they're starting out. So yeah, we do very proactive outreach and engagement in that sense, with as I say, with undergrads, early career researchers, etc.
Right. So do you run workshops? Is that how you do it? At different universities, or do you run standalone workshops?
Usually it's in partnership with a university, and very local to that context. But sometimes it can be universities that want to run that together, and collaborate on that. So yeah, that's something we do quite frequently. And we've done that virtually over the last few years as well, now that we can't actually get physically into places.
Right. I mean, at Ashoka University as well, we have another very important center called CWC, which is the writing center, and it sort of works specifically in this way that you were describing, works with young undergrads as well as researchers, as well as PhD candidates, to sort of answer these questions which need to be answered. I mean, how can you be expected to just kind of, I don't know, sort of have some kind of osmosis effect or something and know all of this? So yeah, the more universities focus on having centers of this sort, I think the better it is for writer researchers. Absolutely. I'm looking at another question by somebody called Navdeep. I'm an early career scholar with a chapter in an edited volume lined up for publication next year. But I got to know about the call for proposals purely because I was part of a couple of listservs that I joined when I was in a university in the US. I could just as well not have been on those. What are some ways publishers are trying to reach prospective authors? And how can we correct the information disparity between the global South and the North? Rimina, do you want to take this? Outreach to authors, prospective authors? Everyone can answer this, actually. I'd love to know what all of you are doing about this. Rimina, do you want to start?
Yeah, well, like Vicky mentioned, Taylor & Francis also has a huge sort of outreach and engagement program. Usually, the marketing departments are very, very active in this, and they in collaboration with either editorial or sales, depending on the context, do partner with universities and have these workshops in any case for training and everything. But also, if there are to encourage publishing, to encourage people to sort of join in. I think there are certainly efforts made at it by, again, these are mailings. A lot of it is actually just mailings based on subject specific disciplines. You kind of choose different subjects, and then lists are usually sent out. But yeah, I think there is a lot. I mean, given the size and the diversity of the global South and of India, I think it's a big road still. I mean, we really haven't covered as much as one would have. And this is a journey, of course. I mean, I think a lot of universities already have partnered, and they, societies, institutions, they have already, got relationships in place. They do send proposals. And on the website, a few things about the company, about the organization, about what its publishing profile is, about what kind of text types there can be. This kind of information is usually available in most publishers, and there will be a sort of tab which will say how to publish, join in, write to this email contact. usually, I mean, there is both active and passive forms of ways of doing it. And of course, there is the academic community, which kind of feeds into each other, and that helps also. But yes, I mean, definitely there's a huge room where many things can happen simply because of the size and diversity and the number of disciplines that we work with.
Yeah, I think Rimina's answered it comprehensively, but is there anything that anyone would want to add? I mean, I'd say that we go hammer and tongs in social media. That's what we small indies do. I mean,
Yeah.
and I have to say, we've had the most incredible response to calls for entries, always via Instagram and Twitter, and academic Twitter is alive and well and kicking and thriving, etc. Anyone else wants to add anything more? Yeah, Vicky?
I would just add that I think this is a two-way process. So we will push out a lot on social channels, as Rimina said, direct mail, kind of via lists, etc. So we will make those calls for papers easy to find if you're looking. But also, I think as a researcher, make it easy for us to find you. So make sure your academic profile is up to date, that we know what your research interests are, so that when we are doing a search for researchers that fit a call for papers, we can find you easily. So yeah, I just wanted to say that I think it's a two-way process.
Yeah, that's a very, very important point, considering I know so many young academics who just don't even want to be on the academic social media channels. I mean, they have to be told, are you on academia.edu? Are you on Google Scholar? And, you know, there's blank. Yeah, Aritra, what would you add to that?
I would just like, because it's like, I have been observing it for a while, read the submission guidelines, please. Like, read the submission guidelines. Every website, I mean, every company has a website, and we all have our submission guidelines. I mean, if you read the submission guidelines, you will know if the company is like, if your topic is aligned with the company or not. Just read the submission guideline. It saves you a lot of time.
And disappointment, perhaps.
Yes.
Adrian, would you add something to that? About reaching out to authors? Reaching out to prospective authors? What are we doing, all of us?
Well,
to make sure we do it efficiently.
Well, I must admit, I tend to rely on the editors of collections that they are in touch with the sort of key figures and emerging talents in their fields. And then I get further advice from other scholars, particularly on our editorial advisory board, as to whether that, you know, how effectively they've done it, because it is a concern for us if it's, you know, a departmental, or it could be seen as a departmental collection or something like that. We want it to be as representative as it can be. Yeah,
ultimately it's down to the people, the humans, isn't it? I mean, commissioning editors, as they say here, commissioning editors Zindabad, good commissioning editors Zindabad. So if you know a house has good commissioning editors, go for that house, absolutely. There's one last question. I think I'm going to wrap up with that last question. I'm just trying to look at it here. Yeah, oh, this is from my colleague in the undergraduate writing program, Aman shares. On paywalls, a researcher is supposed to have a right to access research conducted by other people. Most jurisdictions recognize such a right to access research. However, how does an independent researcher meaningfully exercise this right when faced with a paywall? Spot on, valid question. I mean, but who wants to go for this? Who wants to try and answer this? I don't want to throw it at anybody and have them hating me for the rest of my life.
As far as I'm aware, you know, it's not easy. I mean, if something is behind a paywall and the journal or publisher in question is really set on that, you know, being the case, then you need to get some kind of institutional access. And if that's not always possible, then I think, you know, then it's a question of sort of personal contacts and networks, and can somebody, you know, manage to access it and share it with you.
There's
Assuming
no
that's
getting
not
around
breakdown.
that. There's no getting around that, I think, for the moment at least. This is a question that certainly has not been addressed. And yeah, I mean, Aman has just written, sharing does amount to infringement, actually. Also, I mean, in a sense. So then where's the rule being kept alive? Vicky, would you add to that?
Well, I mean, a lot of publishers do have agreements with public libraries as well. So that is, that is another route to try. Because if there are those public library agreements, then obviously that's available in the public domain through access at your local library. So there are routes, absolutely, but this isn't easy, and it's not universal practice, so it's tricky.
And I think, I think we can agree that, when you put something behind a paywall beyond the point, I mean, it is, in a sense, it is a monetizing practice. I mean, of course, one would say there's nothing wrong with that, but on the other hand, what about everything you're talking about when it comes to community building, ecosystem, gatekeeping being smashed, that does run into trouble, isn't it? Rimina, is there anything you want to add to that? I know that we are all beginning to make a lot of our books available. I mean, I can't speak for journals, but a lot of our books available via open access platforms. Rimina, I think you're also doing that at Taylor and Francis, aren't you?
Yeah, absolutely. And I know we are already in the murky waters since we are discussing this really difficult question. But, one of the questions to ask oneself would be, what is not behind a paywall? I mean, we're considering the term paywall, and we use it for journals. We could extend it to books, but what about other things? Do we ask the same question, that this is behind a paywall? And do we? So when we say that there's books, I mean, it's absolutely a creation just like any other. Just like, I mean, should art be free? Should it be behind a paywall? You could start asking such questions. I mean, it's after all, it is somebody's intellectual work, some publishers' validation, and it's a difficult and very, very tricky question. Of course, like Nathan said and Vicky said, I mean, a lot of this is to do with how institutions, how universities, how funders, how sponsors of societies are able to contribute this and to support this. I mean, I think the responsibility cannot just lie on publishers alone to get. Of course, they will make all attempts. I mean, we are in an open access age now. I mean, there is no looking back. We are headed in that direction. We know, we need to make our content accessible, diverse, as far-reaching, as wide as possible. But what are the costs of that? And we have to really bluntly look at that reality of how do we make that possible. In order for something to be free, someone needs to support that cost. There are, and when we say community, there's it's a whole, so it's really not an easy question definitely to answer, but we know publishers do try to do as much as they can, but there are constraints that everybody faces. It's just a question of being on which side, as if you're a publisher, and possibly it is not even taking sides. It's just to look at that the process as a whole, to see all angles, and then you possibly have a very different view of how. But a lot has to do with university and institutions coming to fore. I mean, look at our health spending, look at our education spending. I mean, it's bizarre. So I mean, look at from that angle. Where is the investment going? Is it going more into the STEM? Is it going more into HSS? We know that these are tough questions, but they need to be asked. So it's a part of a larger, much broader problem, I think.
Yeah. I've got more questions coming in, but I'm all out of time. Siddharth has asked, another colleague of mine at the UWP, Siddharth has asked a very good question about open access. But Siddharth, I think what we need to do is have another panel on just open access at some point. and get the panelists back to talk just about that, perhaps, because we're really all out of time. They've been talking, they've been so generous. For Nathan, it's possibly after midnight in Melbourne. Nathan, a big, big shout out to you for that. Thank you so much. Thank you, Vicky. Thank
pleasure.
you, Rimina.
Thank
you, Oritra. Thank you, Devapriya, for holding my hand through this curation, and Mukundan for making sure all the tech and logistics worked well. The IT department at Ashoka University. Thank you for being such troopers and making it all work. And to everybody at Track Changes, and of course, Devapriya is Mama Track Changes, who makes everything happen and brings these brilliant events to life. Thank you, and to our colleagues, Devapriya's and my colleagues at the undergraduate writing program, a fabulous, fabulous team to be part of, and they're making all of these things, so many of these things that we've talked about today possible, and facilitating, this bridge between publishing and writing. And thank you to the audience. Friday evening, it is Friday evening, isn't it? Yeah, I've forgotten Sunday after this discussion. Friday evening, I know you'd rather be, well, we can't be going out, but you'd rather be stretched out in front of Netflix. So we're going to say bye-bye, and thank you again to my wonderful
Thank you.
panelists.
Really, thank you, everyone. This was wonderful.
Thank you. Thank
Okay,
you so much. And thank you, Arpita. Thank you, Devapriya.
Thanks,
Thank
Rimina.
you, everybody.
Bye, Vicky.
Thank
Bye,
you.
Nathan.
Bye.
Bye, Oritra.